Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you this morning. Thank you for you and your team being here today. And I want to tell you that I appreciated our conversation and received a very timely response from the department with regard to my request on Act 70 of 2014 and assuring that the department is meeting its obligations in how schools across the Commonwealth educate students about the Holocaust and genocide. So thank you for that. You're very quotable. I think I've been writing a lot down here, but you said educational opportunity for all students and choices for parents. Mm-hmm. A lot of people that are probably very happy to have heard you say that. So I understand you were nominated 79 days ago, if that's correct.
I lost count.
Time flies when you're having fun, right? So I was a little perplexed with regard to your response in terms of Lifeline scholarships. So the governor said that he supported Lifeline scholarships, but we don't see any reflection of that in the budget yet. He said that he did not support the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and booked $700 million of revenue in DEP's budget. So I think we are going to have to continue to have that conversation. And I know that we're going to have an opportunity to reimagine how we fund education. So I want to pivot to an issue that really upsets Southern York County homeowners, and that is the local school property tax. Earlier this year, the Auditor General DeFore, released the findings of an audit of 12 school districts showing massive cash reserves for these respective districts. I think what's worse is that in addition to these reserves, all 12 of those school districts sought and received approval by the Department of Education to raise taxes above the Act 1 index. That was the law that was originally passed to limit school property tax hikes. And the general called it a shell game, where districts would move funding around to gain the department's approval to seek that increase above the Act 1 index. He also went on to say that the process, while legal, lacks transparency. So some of these school districts are sitting on reserves in excess of 20%. We compare that to our state, which sits, according to the Independent Fiscal Office, the report that they put out last month, I believe 27th in the nation. We have about 11.6% of our budget in a rainy day fund. 3 questions. First, how do we make this process more accountable and more transparent to those local school property taxpayers? What is a reasonable reserve funding percentage, right? GASB tells us it's 13%. How does it relate to that school budget, in your opinion, as a former school superintendent? And do we need greater safeguards to protect our beleaguered local school property taxpayers when it comes to Act 1?
Thank you so much, Senator, for your question. I am going to defer this question to Jess for several reasons. One, a legal reason. I'm in that suit. And 2, the breakdown of the numbers. And let me preface that by saying I was involved in that discussion when I was a superintendent. I'm no longer involved in that, and so I don't want to give any, I don't want to have a biased answer to this. I will stick with the numbers.
Thank you for your question, Senator. The Act 1 process that PDE follows is a process that's in school code. It's very defined. It's the factors that we have to take into consideration are very defined. Fund balance is not one of those factors. What we have been looking at in kind of response to the Auditor General's audits of those 12 school districts, and I believe it was in our testimony, because we were going through budget prep, we didn't appear at that hearing, but we support legislation or recommended that we maybe have conversations about how we can legislate those transfers into the fund balance, while still keeping local control a front and center issue, because that's really what it is. To answer your question on, what is a reasonable fund balance for a school to have, I think that is dependent on local decision making. So we need to keep the local control efforts there, but in terms of accountability to taxpayers, have maybe a board resolution for all type those fund transfers that were cited by the Auditor General.
So school districts currently have to pass a resolution to indicate whether or not they will seek an increase.
That's right.
Above the Act 1 index. And that there's a very specific timeline of when school districts have to perform certain actions within their budget, right? I was a former school board director, remember passing those resolutions. So what you're saying is that you believe that it would be beneficial to increase the transparency of what's going on with fund transfers within their rainy day funds and their reserve balances, for them to have to pass additional resolutions on those types of financial actions.
So there are some types of fund transfers that can be done without a board resolution. They can take it to the board, but it's not a requirement. And so what we had mentioned in our testimony was to require that other types of funding transfers require a board resolution, so that it is transparent to taxpayers. And we can provide more context around that. Absolutely.
Well, I think it's important that before you ask taxpayers for an increase and take more of their hard-earned funds out of their wallets, that you utilize some of those funds that you have. And look, understand that we need funds for rainy days. We can't anticipate what is going to happen, but we need to make sure that they're not excessive. We have heard from the Revenue Secretary about the softening of the economy. We've heard the same things being echoed by the Independent Fiscal Office. Families are hurting. So before we ask them for more money, I think we should make sure that we're utilizing what we have. So I appreciate that testimony here today, and we'll look forward to continuing that conversation. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.